William, thank you so much for joining our podcast today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, William, you describe yourself, I guess, as a litigator, mainly.
Yes, that's what I enjoy.
What motivated you to become a litigator?
For reasons unbeknown to me, I've always wanted to be a barrister since I was very young. In fact, I probably about as young as 12 years old, I came to Port Louis through my dad, who knew Patrice de Speville, and I marshalled him, I guess, for a day. And
at 12 years old?
At 12 years old. And I'll always remember that on that day, he had a case, and which was obviously postponed or disposed of or something of the like. And I obviously then hadn't seen a case being heard or pleaded. So he sent me down to the court below, which was, if I'm not mistaken, it must have been the intermediate criminal court. And there I sat in the public gallery, hearing and listening attentively to what was happening. And unfortunately, the case I happened to hear related to a man who had clearly done something wrong and who had been found guilty and who had been sentenced. So he was being sentenced. The hearing was a sentencing hearing, and he'd been sentenced, and he got penal servitude. And his wife and child were there, and they both broke down into tears. He also obviously was very emotional about it, but his wife and child broke into tears. And I walked out of the courtroom thinking, I can never, ever, ever do this job. It's far too hard for me. It's emotionally, I'll never cut the cloth. So I went back to Patrice and I said, look, it's not for me, thanks, bye.
At 12 years old.
At 12 years old. But thankfully, I don't know, it just lingered, and I kept coming back, and I ended up going to Patrice again and again and again over the years. And we sort of built a relationship, I guess, where we exchanged views and I asked him a lot of questions, and he tried to answer my probably...
He's always been very generous with his time.
He is extremely generous, and still today, you know, with pupils and mini pupilages, he involves his pupils and his mini pupils a lot, and I think it's a great school to have gone through and to still be in, because obviously you still learn all the time. And then as I grew older, I suppose your personality comes up and comes out, and you develop your own personality, and what I enjoy doing is convincing people. So I like standing in court and trying to convince a judge or a magistrate or someone that what I'm saying is right.
Yeah. Do you do criminal law at all?
So I do a little bit of criminal law. Our chambers is principally obviously a civil set and commercial set, but I do a little bit of criminal law, and I personally find that criminal law is really what gets the juices flowing. It can be very procedural, but it's much more, I feel like the human aspect of it is much more important, and it's what I like. I like that human aspect, and rightly or wrongly, I feel that there's perhaps more importance to be attached to it because of the human consequences of what may happen. Yeah, I do a bit of criminal law. It's interesting, but you know, litigating is, obviously, you can specialize in a particular area, but at the end of the day, regardless of the file, pleading in court is pleading in court, and it doesn't really change. You need to know your brief, know your file, and then try and convince whoever that what you're saying is what is to be believed.
And do you find it hard to not get, I mean, probably for, you know, pure commercial matter, it's easier if you're defending a company to kind of not get emotionally attached to the case. But do you think that's a quality or a weakness in a litigator?
I think it's a big quality to be able to detach yourself emotionally from what's happening and from what you're doing. In terms of the emotional aspect of it, I think it's a very big quality. I mean, at the end of the day, the best lawyers take lawyers to defend themselves, not because the lawyers know more than the lawyer who's being sued or whatever, but because they have that emotional detachment which enables someone to see a file differently and objectively, and using that objective view often enables you to depict and portray something which is probably much more coherent to a third person than if you're emotionally involved yourself.
And talking about qualities, I mean, you mentioned one quality. I don't know whether you would say this is one of the main qualities. How would you describe, say, 3 main qualities of an aspiring barrister? What qualities must they possess in order to be a good litigator?
I think first and foremost, you'd have to be hardworking because it takes time. It takes a lot of time. It takes commitment. It takes preparation. It takes being able to spend a lot of time on what you need to do, basically. So you'd have to be reasonably hardworking at least. I think you'd have to be respectful to be it the bench, be it your colleagues or your clients or whoever. A respectful barrister and a courteous barrister it's always pleasant to come up against or to see, or often, be it sort of barristers or sometimes even certain magistrates, you can come across as unpleasant, and it just makes for everything to be a bit more difficult and less enjoyable. And at the end of the day, I mean, the way I see it is, it's easy for me to say this now, not being sort of under the cosh and under pressure, but if you can be respectful and courteous and not get emotionally attached and involved in a whole toing and froing, often you can just walk out and say, well, that was good, whatever happened, and I did what I had to do, and you don't come out frustrated, or you don't come out anxious or angry or anything of the like.
So how would you react? I mean, it's interesting you spoke about the respectful quality. I agree with you. I think it's an important quality, but how do you maintain your composure and remain respectful towards, if your opposing counsel, for example, is being extremely disrespectful? Do you take the high road?
I try to. I'm not sure I always manage, but I try to. I think it depends a lot on who you are and obviously how you see things in life and your job and everything in general. If you can convince yourself that there's no need to get dragged into a dogfight or into an insignificant toing and froing which will just lead to nothing, then you can just stay above it and that's for the best. I mean, it's what we all try to do. I'm not sure we all manage to do it, or I certainly don't all the time. But
that's probably a sign of maturity as well.
Obviously, that's very, very true, and it's a very good observation. I mean, I'm sure my very senior counsels would be in a much better position to keep their composure and be courteous than I might be because of my age and my experiences and what I've done or what I haven't done, more to the point. And I suppose it comes with experience and life in general.
Now, how many years are you at the bar now?
So I'm at the bar, I've been at the bar for 7 years, I think. So it's gone quickly.
Yes. And do you feel that, I mean, obviously we see, I can't keep track of the numbers. I want to say around 100 new barristers every year, probably close to that. Do you think the bar is a little bit too crowded in Mauritius?
I don't think we can say that, because I think it's only fair that anyone and everyone can have an opportunity to exercise the job which they want to exercise and to be a barrister if they want to be a barrister. And I think limiting the number of barristers in Mauritius wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. It obviously is not frightening, but surprising maybe to see how many barristers are being called to the bar every year. There's obviously much more which being called to the bar than who are walking away from the bar. And I don't know if there's a negative impact to the number of barristers. I personally haven't necessarily felt that there is. I guess as a general rule, competition is good as long as it's healthy. Yeah. But no, I think anyone and everyone should be entitled and able to pursue their endeavor.
They find it hard though to I mean, maybe share your own experience. Did you find it hard starting out? Obviously, we were always part of Patrice's set. Yeah. Maybe that sets you apart, but do you think someone who's just been called to the bar would find it hard?
I think they would. I think probably the first 5 or 6 years, financially at least, are very, very tough. If you're setting up shop on your own, I think they'd be particularly difficult. I, like you said, was very lucky and privileged to be sort of welcomed with open arms into Patrice's set, and he's always been very, very good to me, and he continues to be to this day. Yeah, I think it is difficult. I think financially it's difficult. I think perhaps professionally it's quite difficult as well, and I think in that regard, I was speaking to Gavin Glover about it the other day, and he was saying that what he thinks all young aspiring barristers should do is just go to court day after day after day. Just go to court, even if it's just to look at what's happening, because you invariably pick up on what everyone is doing, and you can kind of like create your own mold on the basis of what others are doing. So you can pick what each and everyone are doing, and then make your own sort of creation of how you want to be a barrister, or how you want to litigate and plead in court. And then obviously there's no substitute to experience. So just being in court and knowing the pitfalls and what can happen, what can't happen, and what to do in certain situations. I mean, the more prepared you are, the better you'd be. So I think it is hard, but I think everyone should just kind of hang in there, and it gets better. It does get better. We all know it does get better, otherwise there wouldn't be any barristers. But it's certainly, even with my sort of lucky falling into Patrice's set and etc., I remember thinking at some point, well, this is
I might cut out
challenging at the very least. So it is difficult, and I've spoken to barristers who aren't in a set and who have tried to set up shop on their own, and they have said that it's particularly difficult. I mean, nowadays I feel the Bar Council is being perhaps more supportive in terms of accompanying barristers who are starting out, be it in terms of sort of simple questions such as setting up your tax operation, how you're going to do things, or where you need to pay tax, where you need to have licenses,
who you need to register
who
with,
you register with, etc., etc. So they're definitely getting much better at that. So I think the further we go, the easier it will be for aspiring barristers to be able to come and do that.
One of the things that you mentioned is, the piece of advice that Gavin shared with you about going to court and regularly, being prepared and watching everything that goes by. One of the recurring comments that we had from former practicing barristers who are now in-house was the thing they miss least about practicing at the bar, and that was the endless postponements. Do you share that frustration, or have things gotten better since?
I don't think they've got better as such in terms of postponing matters or not postponing matters. I think it's very dependent on the bench. Some benches are more inclined to allow postponements than others. But I personally don't see it as an issue. I think, if anything, if anyone is prejudiced by it, it's the client more than you. It's your job. You go to court. You do what you do. Obviously, it can be frustrating if you spend the whole weekend preparing a file so that on Monday morning you're told that the case is being postponed or it's not being heard. But I mean, it forms part of the job. I mean, part of litigating is calling witnesses, and you can't control whether or not a witness comes. I mean, you can try and do as much as you can to secure that person's attendance, but you can't guarantee it. So again, and like we were saying earlier on, I think if you start getting frustrated and bitter about these inevitabilities of the profession, then you're just going to make yourself unhappy by building up frustration or bitterness or whatever it may be. So I try to not let it affect me and to just sort of operate under the pretense that it exists, it always will exist, deal with it.
There's a chance that it will happen. And
exactly. That being said, you can't bank on the fact that it will be postponed and then end up completely unprepared. So, but no, to answer your question, I think I don't think it affects me necessarily too much. And I think if one if anyone could feel particularly frustrated by it, it'd be the client more than I would.
Of course, yeah. I mean, we've all heard of horror stories about cases dragging on for decades.
They can. I mean, they can drag on, and I mean, without wanting to go into too much detail, at the minute I'm representing a client who's a foreign national, and he's been arrested on a provisional charge, and I've tried to have that provisional charge struck out, and it's just being postponed on account of several things which are sometimes legitimate, sometimes not so legitimate, and it just results in a foreign national being stuck in Mauritius and not being able to...
Presumably there's an objection to departure.
There is an objection to departure which has been lodged against him, and a prohibition order in that regard, and it frustrates me. And remember earlier on we were saying don't get emotional and attached emotionally to the matter, but it's frustrating. It can be frustrating, and to say differently would be lying.
I mean, talking about cases, in your several years of practice, without obviously going into details if it's not public, what case have you enjoyed the most and why?
Well, that's a difficult one.
I'm sure there are many.
For different reasons, there are many. But like I said earlier on, I think what I like the most about my job is the human aspect of it, and the emotional, human. I mean, I'm a big softie. I admit that readily. I'm a big softie. And I suppose if I had to pick one, it's probably one of my first cases. We had a lady come and see us at the office who'd had an issue with, or she was looking after a child, someone else's child, and that child had an issue in one of the SOS villages, and he'd been arrested and placed in a juvenile remand center. He had siblings and a mother and siblings who were in Mauritius, but who weren't in the SOS village, and they had some way or another managed to leave Mauritius and to immigrate to the UK.
The siblings.
The siblings and the mother. So this brother, who was my client, who was, I think he must have been 15 or 16 at the time, was stuck in Mauritius because, like you said, there was a prohibition order against him. He'd been arrested, and he'd been sent back actually to the SOS village. I'd managed, I can't remember exactly what it was, 7 years ago or 6 years ago, and I'd managed to have that provisional charge struck out after sort of 6 months of trying relentlessly, because when you're fresh out the box, you're obviously much more enthusiastic about it.
Yes.
The provisional charge had been struck out, and that client, that child, had been able to go back, well, would have been able to go back to the UK, and he did. And I always remember he burst into tears. He was 15 years old. You know, 15-year-old child who thinks he's sort of a bit of a bad boy and probably shaves an eyebrow.
Yeah. But actually, he misses his mum.
Like me, he's a softie. He misses his mum. He thought his mum and brothers were gone forever, and that he would end up in a sticky situation. But thankfully, the provisional charge was struck out, and he was able to join them. So in court he burst into tears, and I almost burst into tears too, wiping away the tears.
Pretending fly in my eye.
Exactly. And that was probably, it still is probably, it's like I said, one of the first, but it'll always stay with me because it was, I didn't make obviously any money of it, but it was very, very gratifying personally, and maybe it was kind of the time where I thought, right, this is exactly what I want to be doing. It gave me the impetus to think, I'm on the right track, this is what you want to do, crack on.
Again, without going into any details, but do you ever feel that I'm on the wrong side of this case? Or because you managed to emotionally detach yourself, you don't ask yourself that question? I
must be honest, I never asked myself that question.
Good answer.
I've been taught well. But obviously, you prepare a case and you end up thinking, geez, is what I'm going to say actually going to make sense because it seems so blatant? Yeah. But no, I think, like we said earlier on, you learn to detach yourself emotionally, you look at the case objectively.
And you act in the best interest of your client.
And you act in the best interest of your client. We all know what the duties of a barrister are and how they are reduced into the code of ethics, but at the end of the day, you do a job. I mean, that's how I see it. You do a job, and in doing your job, you do it to the best of your endeavors, and the result is the result. You don't control the end product, you control the process. Yeah,
that's a brilliant answer, actually, controlling the process. And you mentioned the code of ethics, and I had a question, not relating to just that, but it made me think of a question. Do you think there are certain areas for barristers in Mauritius, or at the bar in general, that could do with some modernization in terms of not just our code of ethics, but just broadly as well?
I think more than the code of ethics, what could do with modernization is the district courts and the way that they aren't sort of necessarily digitally recorded, and the proceedings are still being handwritten, the minutes of proceedings are still being handwritten. I think that's definitely an aspect which urgently needs attending to. I mean, you go to a district court and you plead a case which would realistically probably only take you 25 minutes, but you're there for 3 hours because you're following the pen of the magistrate, and the magistrate has to pause
minute to, yeah.
It's difficult, not for me, not for the barrister, because obviously you know your train of thought, you know where you're going with your questions, etc., but I think that for the magistrate who sat there writing everything down, maybe if they would be in a position to listen sort of objectively to what you're saying and how you're portraying what you're trying to say, they'd be in a better position to judge the matter, as opposed to sort of having to be there and writing down everything that you're saying and writing in short form so that you can go quickly, etc. So I think that's definitely something that needs improving and that can be improved. The other aspect would obviously be police statements. I think the fact that we still sign on the carbon copy paper is a bit archaic and needs reviewing. What else needs reviewing? I don't want to be too critical but you spoke of the code of ethics. I think the code of ethics is the code of ethics. It's fundamental principles are there, and I think they're good, they're proper, they're right. I don't think they need to necessarily be reviewed or anything of the like. I think their enforcement is something. I mean, we all know this proposal that's been going around, which I haven't looked into much, I must confess, but I think the code of ethics is fine. It doesn't need touching. Rather spend resources on more important and more...
Making the judicial system a bit more effective and efficient.
Yeah. And you speak to police officers in court and magistrates and other barristers, and we all agree, we're all on the same page in that it is tedious to go and sit in a police station and write out sort of... It's funny, but 5 pages of statement can take 2 hours. Like I said, in court, something that would take 2 minutes to 20 minutes takes 3 hours. So I think that if there's one area that really needs to be reviewed to sort of maybe improve the administration of justice, that would be it. If it happened, it would obviously enable more cases to be heard, less postponements, less clogging of the judicial system. I mean, the snowball effect is quite huge.
Of course. And in terms of sort of young aspiring barristers who would like to be primarily litigators, in your experience, do you find it hard to balance consulting and the demands of being a litigator, where you have to be in court for substantial amount of time?
So it's what I've always known, to be honest, because at Patrice's set, what he does is exactly that. He's in court.
In the morning and then afternoon you have to...
It literally works out like that. He's in court most mornings or into the early afternoon, and then as from sort of 2:33 onwards, then you move on to the consulting and advice aspect of the profession, I suppose, which obviously doesn't leave much time for preparation for the next day's case. Exactly. But I think whatever you do in life, you find a way to balance things out and to make time for what you need to make time and what you prioritize or not. And I don't think they're mutually non-exclusive. I think they can be done together.
One of the things that we get asked often as well in our law firm and for young professionals as well, sometimes when starting out, they might have this misconception that it's a 9-to-5 job, and it is definitely not a 9-to-5 job.
It's definitely not a 9-to-5. And obviously, it depends, I suppose, if you're independent, as I am, or if you're in a law firm or an in-house lawyer, for example, as well. It certainly isn't 9-to-5. Some days it can be anything from 6 to midnight, but then it can also be not at all.
Yeah.
So
where
again,
you can have your downtime.
You have your downtime. You manage yourself, and at the end of the day, like we said earlier on, you always find the way, you find the rhythm, you find what works for you. there's clearly certain times during the year where you work more than others in terms of courts being on holiday or not, or whatever that may be. I think as you go through life, and obviously what happens in parallel, so you get married, you have children, you do all these things, and all that has an effect on how much time you can spend or attribute, or how you spend and attribute that time to your profession. And at the end of the day, it's very individual, and I think, and personal to each person, and everyone does what works for them.
Yeah, and I think that especially, I mean, I have a young family, you have a young family too. I think one of the great joys of being able to control your time as well is being able to decide, okay, this is going to be my quality time. You might not necessarily have as an employee.
Yeah, it's massive. I think it really helps being able to dictate your own sort of timings. It helps enormously, not only in terms of obviously spending quality time with your children or whoever that may be, but also in terms of logistics. I mean, we all know life is real and logistics are part of life, and just having that flexibility, I wouldn't give it up for anything. And I've said it many a time. I've been approached many a time to go and work in law firms and in-house, etc., but it doesn't work for me. I've never tried, but it doesn't. I truly believe that it wouldn't work for me. I think that this flexibility, this independence that I have is very, I value it very high.
Last question, apart from the valuable piece of advice that Gavin shared with you about going there every day, being in court every day, what single piece of advice would you give to a aspiring barrister? So someone who's going through their pupillage, who's about to be called to the bar and would like to be a self-employed barrister, who's been perhaps approached by a law firm and who can see the attraction of having a fixed salary but actually really wants to be at the bar. What single piece of advice would you give to them?
Hang in there. It's difficult, but it's very gratifying in a sense. I mean, I think it's, again, very personal. Some people would much rather have a fixed 9-to-5 standard, steady salary, steady income of funds, and then work from there. Others, like myself, much rather not have that and have sort of the flexibility and the ability to dictate what you do. And I feel that it's invaluable. I really think that my dad, for all the good advice he's given me all over the years, has always told me that he would have loved to work for himself. I mean, he's 65 and now still working for someone else, and he thinks that all his life, all he's thought is, I wish I worked for myself. I wish I worked for myself. And I've never worked for someone, so I can't sort of say that it's much better to work for yourself than to work for someone, or that it's better, or the other way around. But I strongly feel that I wouldn't be as happy and as fulfilled in working for someone else. And I think that being given the profession that I'm in and the fact that I'm able to work for myself, I'll stick to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I remember I was talking to someone, one of my friends back in the UK the other day, and she was still at the law firm that we started at. And I said to her that, you know, I decided to found Prism Chambers 3 years ago. And wherever life decides to take me, I can't picture myself working for someone again. And I have done it. I've been an employee up until 3 years ago. So I think it's really, as you said, it's very principle based. Some people, it's not for everyone. Some people would prefer the stability of an employment, but I think if you enjoy and value your independence and being able to do what you love, then maybe the bar is for you.
But look, the bar, I truly think that the end note is that the bar is it's a good place to be. It's a good place to be. And I think that as a general rule, it's very welcoming, and it enables people to express themselves and to develop into who they want to be. So I think as a general rule, it's a good place.
Last questions. I know that it's you rather than a participant in front of me, and perhaps you can't speak on behalf of him, but do you accept new pupillages for aspiring barristers? Maybe you could just say a line on the application process.
His chambers is called the Speville Desvaux, and he does accept pupillage applications and even mini pupillage applications. I mean, I can't exactly recall the process of how to get into it, but
it is possible.
It is possible. Have a quick look up on Google and you'll find the relevant information, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Super.